Drone strike kills one in Odessa, UK to declare Wagner a terrorist group. Tunisian police arrest top officials in Ennahda, and US warns North Korea on arms deal with Russia. Southeast Asian leaders have strongly condemned the ongoing violence in Myanmar, unswervingly blaming the bloodshed on the generals who seized power in a coup in February 2021. The 10-member Association of Southeast Asian Nations ASEAN is meeting in Jakarta after the generals failed to implement the so-called five-point consensus to end the crunch, which they agreed to with ASEAN a couple of months after their power grab. Violence has only aggravated in the months since, with the military accused of war crimes from its attacks on civilians. The leaders urged the Myanmar Armed Forces in specific and all connected parties concerned in Myanmar to de-escalate violence and stop aiming attacks on civilians, houses and public facilities such as schools, hospitals, markets, the leaders said in a statement, according to reports. Myanmar is also a member of ASEAN but has been banned from high-profile events because of its failure to implement the five-point consensus. On Wednesday, in a statement, the Foreign Ministry rejected the ASEAN statement, saying the views are not objective and decisions are biased and one-sided. Noting its leaders were not in Jakarta, the statement said that while Myanmar had been consulted on the draft, its view and voices had not been taken into account. Myanmar has scheduled to chair the 10-member grouping in 2026, but regional leaders earlier agreed that the Philippines will assume the role in 2026 instead. The chair is usually rotated each year based on the alphabetical order of the English names of the member states. Myanmar, which joined ASEAN under a former military government in 1997, chaired the organization in 2014 under the country's first civilian head of state. Talking Russia-Ukraine war, officials said one person was killed in Russian drone attacks on a port district in Ukraine's southwestern Odessa region, while Ukrainian air defense successfully shot down a barrage of Russian missiles fired at aims in the capital, Kyiv. The nighttime attacks on Odessa's Izmail district lasted 3 hours, Regional Governor Oleg Kipa said early on Wednesday. Unfortunately, one person died, said Kipa, adding that it was an agricultural worker who had been seriously injured and died in the hospital. Destruction and fires were recorded in several settlements, he added, saying that port and agricultural infrastructure had been damaged, including administrative buildings. The Dnabe River port of Izmail, which borders NATO member Romania, has become a major export route for Ukrainian agricultural produce since Russia's withdrawal from a United Nations brokered grain deal in July. Ukraine's Dnabe ports have become targets of sustained Russian raids in recent weeks. Early on Wednesday, Kyiv also came under Russian missile attack, but there were no initial reports of casualties or damage, authorities said. Russian aircraft fired cruise missiles at Kyiv, while other missiles were also focused on hitting targets in the capital, Seripopko, the head of the Kyiv City Military Administration said. According to data at the moment, there are no victims or destruction, Kyiv Popko said. Another missile attack by the enemy on a peaceful city with the aim of killing the civilian population, destroying the infrastructure, he added. The precise scale of the attack on Kyiv was not instantly known. Ukraine's Air Force said aerial defense systems had destroyed 23 out of 33 air weapons that Russia had launched against the country. They included 25 Iranian-made Shahed drones, 7 cruise missiles, and 1 Iskander ballistic missile. On Wednesday, the Russian Defense Ministry also said that its air defense systems destroyed a Ukraine-launched drone just before midnight on Tuesday over the Bryansk region, which borders Ukraine. Alexander Bogosman, the governor of the Bryansk region, said there was no damages or casualties. Now, the United Kingdom government is set to declare Wagner, the Russian mercenary group, as a terrorist organization. According to reports, a draft order will be put forward in Parliament to allow Wagner's assets to be categorized as terrorist property and seized. The designation will make it illegal for anyone in the UK to be a member of the group or support it. The order will be presented on Wednesday, reports said. The decision to prescribe the group under the Terrorism Act 2000 was taken due to the nature and scale of the organization's activities as well as the threat they pose to British nationals, abroad, reports cited the Home Office as saying. Suella Braverman, Home Secretary, described Wagner as violent and destructive, a military tool of President Vladimir Putin's Russia, and said its activities were a threat to global security. The UK has already enforced sanctions on Wagner, some of its senior commanders, and those connected to it in Africa over alleged human rights abuses, but had been under pressure to go further. David Lammy, the shadow foreign secretary, noted the opposition Labour Party had called in February for the prescription. Wagner played a prominent role in Moscow's war in Ukraine and was instrumental in Russia's capture of Bakhmut city in May. It has also been active in many African countries and Syria. Its chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was killed when his private jet crashed on its way from Moscow to St. Petersburg in August, 2 months to the day that he launched a brief and unsuccessful mutiny against Russia's top military leaders. Wagner troops have reportedly been sent to Belarus, and their future role in Ukraine remains unclear. While Putin's regime decides what to do with the monster it created, Wagner's continuing destabilizing activities only continue to serve the Kremlin's political goals, Braverman said. They are terrorists, plain and simple, and this prescription order makes that clear in United Kingdom law. On politics, 2 top officials in Tunisia's major opposition, Ennahda party, have been detained, the party said in the newest aiming of opponents of President Kais Saied. On Tuesday, the interim head of Ennahda, Monda Onisi, was detained by police, and minutes afterwards so was Abdel Karim Harouni, who was placed this week under house arrest, the party said according to reports. Onisi's arrest follows the publication of audio recordings on social media this week attributed to him, in which he allegedly accused some officials in his party of seeking to control Ennahda and receiving illegal funds. On Monday, Tunisia's Public Prosecution Office opened an inquiry into the recordings. Onisi said in a video on his Facebook page that the recordings were fabricated. Harouni, the second detained official, heads the Shura Council, the highest-ranking body in Ennahda, which was the biggest political party in a parliament closed by President Saied in 2021. The opposition party on Sunday said the house arrest of Harouni comes in the context of the detention of the historical leaders of the Ennahda party, the shutting of all headquarters, and threat to its leaders and activities. The police earlier this year arrested Ennahda's leader, Rakat Gannouchi, the most prominent critic of Saied, as well as many other party officials. The 81-year-old Gannouchi was reportedly arrested on a warrant by counter-terrorism prosecutors as part of a probe into proactive comment. Ennahda and his supporters say the charges are politically inspired and the US in a broad campaign that has seen other party officials, including an ex-prime minister, arrested. The African Court on Human and People's Rights ordered last week the Tunisian government to eliminate all barriers and give the country's political prisoners, including Gannouchi, access to legal representatives and doctors. The court also ordered Tunisia's government to update the detainees, their families and lawyers of the reasons for their detention, and to make available all information connected to their assets. The court, which has jurisdiction to hear complaints concerning human rights violations in member states of the African Union that have confirmed the court's charter, gave Tunisia 15 days to implement its order and respond. Tunisian authorities have also barred meetings at all Ennahda offices, and police closed all party offices in what critics see as rising suppression by Saied, whom they accuse of carrying out a coup after he closed the electoral parliament in 2021 and moved to rule by decree before rewriting the constitution. Saied has described those detained as terrorists, traitors, and criminals. Moving ahead, U.S. officials have cautioned that North Korea will pay a price if it strikes an arms deal with Russia, after saying that discussions were advancing between the two nations. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said, according to a report on Tuesday, that if Pyongyang provides weapons to Moscow to use in the war against Ukraine, it is not going to reflect well on North Korea, and they will pay a price for this in the international community. Sullivan did not give more details on the potential consequences for North Korea, which is already under United Nations and U.S. sanctions imposed over Pyongyang's weapons of mass destruction program. We have continued to convey privately as well as publicly to the North Koreans and asked allies and partners to do the same our view that they should abide by their publicly stated commitment that they are not going to provide these weapons, Sullivan said. The National Security Council on Monday claimed arms negotiations between Russia and North Korea are actively advancing after Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu visited Pyongyang in July in an effort to persuade it to sell artillery ammunition. Adrian Watson, the council spokesperson, said North Korean leader Kim Jong-un expects discussions to continue, including leader-level diplomatic engagement in Russia, but did not say when or where a potential meeting between Kim and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Russia might take place. On Tuesday, Sullivan also said the deliberations between Russia and North Korea are a sign that economic sanctions by the West have succeeded in lessening Moscow's defense industrial base. On climate, floods hit Turkey, Greece, and Bulgaria. At least 5 people have been killed in torrential rainstorms and flooding in Greece, Turkey, and Bulgaria, including 2 people who were washed away when flood waters swept through a camping ground in Turkey's northwestern province. Turkish Interior Minister Ali Yerlikaya said on Tuesday that 4 other people were still missing after the flash flood swept over the vacation site in Kirklareli province near the borders with Bulgaria and Greece, where some 12 holidaymakers were staying at the time. Such teams had located 2 bodies and 6 people were rescued. The ministerial said, according to reports, the search and rescue efforts for the missing 4 persons continue uninterruptedly. Yerlikaya said on the platform previously known as Twitter, which accompanying photos of heavily flooded forested areas. In Istanbul, Turkey's largest city, heavy rain flooded streets and homes in at least 2 neighborhoods, shutting down some subway stations and trapping people in a library, the Turkish report said, according to Turkey. Istanbul's governor David Gül said on social media that authorities will provide accommodation in public facilities for those affected by flooding. Turkey's AFAD Disaster Management Agency predicted further rainstorms for the west and southwest of the country and warned of the dangers from flash floods, lightning strikes, and high winds. And finally, on global news, in Africa, move to cleaner energy cannot be reversed, said Kerry. On Tuesday, John Kerry, the U.S. government's climate envoy at the first ever African Climate Summit, said that the transition to cleaner energy cannot be reversed even by climate-skeptic leaders. He said while in Nairobi, Kenya's capital, that the transition is going to happen, in my judgment, because the private sector gets involved in a much greater degree than today. On Monday, the first African Climate Summit opened with heads of states and others asserting a stronger voice on a worldwide issue that affects their continent that most, even though its 1.3 billion people contribute to global warming, the least. Kerry said 17 of the world's 20 countries most affected by climate change are in Africa, while the world's 20 richest nations, including his own, produce 80% of the world's carbon emissions that are driving climate change. Asked about the Kenyan president's call for a carbon tax discussion, Kerry replied that President Joe Biden has not yet embraced any particular carbon pricing mechanism. Yesterday, Kenya's President William Ruto declared on that it is time to have a global conversation about a carbon tax on polluters, adding that climate change is eating away at Africa's economic progress. The United Nations has projected that loss and damage in Africa due to climate change are estimated to be between $290 billion and $440 billion in the period from 2020 to 2030, liable on the degree of warming. The summit's opening speeches included clear calls to reform the global financial structures that have left African nations paying about 5 times more to borrow money than others, worsening the debt crisis for many. Climate finance is vital, speakers said, with richer nations' promise of $100 billion a year in climate finance to developing countries still unfulfilled. Well, let's switch gears now for more stories in Nigeria with Alheri Moses. But before then, let's give a refresh of the major stories. Myanmar junta condemns ASEAN statement on violence. Russian drone strike kills 1 in Odessa. UK to declare Wagner a terrorist group. Tunisian police arrest top officials in Ennahda. And US warns North Korea on arms deal with Russia. Do join us again.
Welcome back and thanks for joining me as I bring you stories from Nigeria in the news. Presidential poll tribunal declares verdict today. Precisely 193 days after the February 25th presidential election, all eyes will today be on the judiciary as Presidential Election Petition Court delivers its verdict in the most anticipated case against the decision election victory of President Bola Tinubu, who clocked 100 days in office yesterday. Though not the last bus stop in the legal fireworks over who is the winner of the election, as the Supreme Court is burning to hear aggrieved parties and their candidates, the countdown to today has been strong and tension-soaked, with several defamation and kitchen sink unleashed and thrown at each other by the ruling party, All Progressive Congress, seeking to secure its mandate. The ruling opposition parties, People's Democratic Party and Labour Party. Nigerians who are already fraught by the economic strategies of the new administration and would be observing the second of a two-day warning strike announced by the Nigerian Labour Congress would take their eyes off work and routine to watch the proceedings as the five-man panel adjudicate on the petitions brought by PDP's Atiku Abubakar and LP's Peter Obi against President Bola Tinubu. While some wonder why the court might overturn the February 25th election and order a rerun, others are of the school of thought that such a judgment might further push the country into deeper crisis and chaos. Considering that no presidential election had been overturned by a court of law in Nigeria since 1999, such an occurrence isn't altogether unprecedented in Africa. Already, there are 4 African countries where the presidential elections were later overturned by the appellate or Supreme Court. In Kenya, 2017, Malawi, 2019, Comoros, 2016, and Madagascar, 2001. In its bid to fortify security architecture and anticipate any breakdown of law and order across the country, banning any outcome from the PEG, the Nigerian police force said it has reinforced its deployment nationwide. ACP Muyiwa Adejobi, police spokesman who made the revelation on the deployment, noted that the police are committed to ensuring the safety of lives and property before, during, and after the judgment. On Monday, the PEC has scheduled today for judgment on the 3 pending cases challenging the outcome of the February 25th presidential election at the Court of Appeal headquarters in Abuja, which hosts the PEC. It's coming about a month after the court had the closing arguments of parties to the petitions, about 2 weeks to the expiration of the statutory 180-day lifespan within which the cases filed in March must be heard and determined. The 5-man panel of the court, headed by Mr. Haruna Samani, had a marked judgment on the petitions after hearing the closing argument of the parties to the case in August. The petitions were filed separately by Atiku, Obi, and a political party, the Allied People's Movement, to challenge President Tinubu's victory. Now on the labor strike records low compliance. A major split between the National Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress had led to partial compliance in the 2-day warning strike declared by Nigerian workers all over the delay in the execution of the palliatives announced by the federal government to cushion the impacts of its removal of fuel subsidy. Across the state of the Federation, the TUC and NLC took opposing positions on the strike, which is scheduled to continue today. The TUC said it opposed the strike because it would not yield the desired result. Comrade Monday Ogbodum, its chairman in Cross River State, condoned a 2-day warning strike embarked upon by leadership of NLC, describing the leadership of NLC as insensitive. Ogbodum, who doubles as chairman Senior Civil Servants Union in Cross River State, said the TUC is not in support of the strike because NLC did not follow the due process before calling out its members to embark on a 2-day warning strike, which he described as uncalled for. The TUC chairman made the remarks while yesterday after the NLC asked the workers in the state to stay at home, reports said. Inspired the TUC arm of the labor movement telling its members to shun the NLC organized strike over delay in the disbursement of fuel subsidy removal palliatives. The industrial action was total across Akwa Ibom, reports said. However, socio-economic activities, including in the civil service and banks, excluding the public transportation system, were totally closed yesterday as the state NLC chairman, Comrade Sonny James, called out members shutting down the Idolonges Ganga Civil Servant Secretariat along Abak Road and the 31 local government area secretariat, stopping workers from entering the premises. Finally, Tinubu assures Indian investors ease in business. President Bola Tinubu has guaranteed prospective Indian investors about the massive profits they stand to make in Nigeria. He promised this on the promise that his administration would break every bottleneck that obstructs their ease of business in Nigeria. Conveyed to the meeting by Nigeria's Minister of Finance, Trade and Industry and Foreign Affairs, Tinubu told his first visitor, Hinduja, that he was in India to attract investors to Nigeria with lucrative opportunities for investors, but most fundamentally jobs for Nigerians and fresh revenue opportunities for Nigeria's federal and subnational governments. The Hinduja Group chairman told the president that he witnessed his landmark effort as governor of Lagos in turning a coastal erosion and water encroachment crunch into a massive free trade zone where industry now thrives. He said this was partly responsible for his excitement to partner with Nigeria's new president to create win-win prosperity for Nigeria's talented population. The president decided that his task of making Nigeria great can only be achieved through teamwork and not in isolation. After the president assigned a collaboration task to the new ministers, the industrialist noticed that he had paperwork delayed in Nigeria bureaucracy for over 1 year, especially in FCT. But I know that you would be purpose-driven in this endeavor, and God will help you turn Nigeria's rich promise into rich reality for all of its citizens. And that's the news. Thanks for watching. I am Alheri Moses.